Now, as a disclaimer, before we start, remember, we now have an open Discord for everyone to be able to join, with the link right in the description, as well as the stream has started. Even now, actually, we should be live raiding on this Sunday evening. Now, besides this disclaimer, what's up for today? Today is the day of reckoning. What we are reckoning today is we are going to check what were the predictions, the ideas of which specs, which power levels the specs were going to have in Season 3, back when we were looking from the perspective of Season 2. When we were thinking, okay, this spec is about to be OP, this one is about to no longer be OP, etc, etc, we made our predictions for fun, just to see how things were going to turn out in this season. Now we are almost 2 weeks through the release of Season 3, so we have now a clearer idea of how things are going in Mythic Plus. Yes, there is still room to change. Yes, the race to world first is right about to end, which is also going to mean some balance tuning is going to come our way right after it's over, so it is bound to change, but in the meantime, we can still take a look at how things are going now compared to what was, I guess, expected right before the season launched. Now, let's start with the easier one of the predictions and the faster one of the predictions, which was the tanks. Now, this was our prediction for 10.2. When we talked about which tanks were going to be the popular ones, it looked like our first pick was going to be Vengeance Demon Hunter. And then the second one was going to be Blood. Blood was going to be there mostly because it has been generally a very popular pick amongst tanks, even when it wasn't that powerful. And in this season, looking already decently powerful, it would have meant the spec was going to remain a popular one. And right now, if we start looking at, for example, higher key levels, you see Death Knight being the second of the most brought tanks, and lower down the usually popular Protection Paladin. Even looking at sub-creation in terms of popularity, you have DK and Paladin below Vengeance Demon Hunter, and even when it comes to tanks, we have again Vengeance followed by DK and Paladin. So compared to our prediction, we kind of are in line with this. The only one that is a little bit off compared to the prediction is Protection Warrior. We put Protection Warrior closer to Protection Paladin than we actually got at the beginning of this season, at least in Mythic Plus. Definitely not nearly as performing or as popular as we were expecting at the beginning of this season. The other one of the predictions, which is a little bit faster to go through, is the one for healers, because our prediction for healers was Discipline. Discipline in Mythic Plus was going to be in the S tier. Then we also believed the buffs, we believed the much stronger state of Mistweaver Monk being a popular alternative. So in reality, what we have compared to our prediction is that yes, overall we can say that Discipline is confirmed first, even though according to U.GG we have a Mistweaver Monk slightly ahead of Discipline. Even though if we still count the popularity of the picks, it remains wildly ahead when it comes to Discipline Priest. The second picks were Holy Paladin and Mistweaver. So in here as well, we do have some confirmations in terms of popularity, but not by much, because Resto Druid at the moment is actually pole vaulting above Holy Paladin, both from the actual numbers straight from Raider.io, from keys at 20 or above, even in sub-creation, looking at both the number of keys but also the average key level being completed by these specs. If you look at even the more detailed numbers, the gap between Resto Druid and Mistweaver Monk is very, very small, while we then have a larger gap for Holy Paladin. So compared to our predictions, we can say Discipline was correct at first. Mistweaver, slightly lower down, was also correct. The main mistake was not swapping Paladin for Resto Druid. Although I will say, I'm not trying to cheat here, but I will say we did put an asterisk next to Resto Druid, because this rating, this prediction was made right on the day or the day after Resto Druid received a significant buff in their damage, and we mentioned perhaps their damage increase was going to help them become more relevant in Mythic Plus compared to what we thought of them before. The two specs at the bottom though, what we can be more safe in predicting. When we predicted Resto Shaman and Holy Priest, we were correct in that prediction, together with Preservation Evoker being above them. So when it came to the non-DPS roles, for tanks, we slightly misjudged the power of Protection Warrior, being slightly weaker, or at the very least slightly less played anyways right now. And for healers, we swapped Resto Druid for Holy Paladin. Now, what about the juicier one, which is of course the DPS side of things, looking at both the melee and then the ranged DPS. Now, the simple easy win, of course, was to predict Havoc Demon Hunter in the S tier. That's one done and gone. We got it right. Congrats. Also then over to the ranged DPS, we also got Augmentation Evoker. So yeah, okay, great. That was very difficult. Congratulations. What about though past those two simple picks? Because our A tier was very, very crowded. We debated on whether or not putting Beast Mastery Hunter together with the other two in the S tier, but we instead chose to leave them in the A tier, right below them. Below them, we also added Balanced Druid, we also added Feral, Arcane, Survival, Fire, Assassination, and Enhancement. So a whole bunch of other specs together. Now, a few of these are, I would say, well performing right now. We have Balanced Druid being quite popular right now. We have, of course, Beast Mastery Hunter, booming in popularity at the moment. We can say it is harder to gain the mages because they continue to be played quite often, all of them. And for the melee DPS, we had Enhancement, we had Assassination, and Outlaw. Now, these two together, make up for the second most popular pick. They're just losing because they are stealing each other's players. They are divided in which pick to go for between Outlaw and Assassination. But overall, their performance is very close in terms of damage, in terms of DPS. We also had some easy guesses when it came to the specs performing poorly. We mentioned in the lower down part, we had Affliction Warlock, we had Destruction, we did have Windwalker, we did have both of the DK specs, we had Elemental Shaman, we had Shadow Priest, we had Marksmanship Hunter, we also had Subtlety Rogue, perhaps not because they were weak, but mostly because the other two rogue specs were doing much better. So when it came to the very lowly populated specs, we were correct on most of them. However, where are the mistakes? Where did we not see some of the picks being that popular, or perhaps where did we overrate certain picks? Where did we have some specs currently not being as powerful or as popular as we thought in our predictions? Well, the first one, I have to say, the first one was believing in Feral Druid. Looking at the PTR, looking at the testing in the PTR, Feral Druid was doing very well. On top of that, Feral Druid was, comfortably beating also Balanced Druid in terms of damage when it came to Mythic Plus. So you were expecting Feral to be way more popular, at the very least way more popular than it is right now, losing even to Windwalker. That's not what was expected of them. Even if you go down to Subcreation, Feral is still not really being played. If you go down here, Feral is still, in the bottom half of the results, and we thought for them to be in the top half of the results. So that's the first one we got quite off. Now, much like I said when we made the prediction, I also believed in another hipster pick together with Feral. I went all in the belief, not just Feral but also Survival, for the same reason. In the PTR, Survival was doing quite nice damage in Mythic Plus. The tier set of Survival is quite strong, so overall, their performance was quite nice. The risk in believing on these two specs is that, of course, they are historically not very popular. So it's hard for many players to just move over to these specs. So unfortunately, for both of them, in terms of their results, they have been not doing nearly as well as it was expected of them. Okay, but now we talked about the specs we overrated, Survival and Feral. What about the specs we underrated in our predictions? Some specs that are doing I would say, better than we thought in our predictions. Well, spec number one, although it is still a slight one, but we're gonna count it in, is Demo. Because even though we did put Demo far above the two other Warlock specs predicted not to be doing well, Demo right now is doing perhaps slightly more, right? Even if you look at the actual damage overall in a key, they are only losing to the clearly OP Havoc Demon Hunter. Besides them, their damage is comparable to BM, and they are beating everyone else comfortably. That's not quite the damage level we were expecting of them, neither the popularity level we were expecting of them. So that's the first one we underrated when we were making our predictions. The second one perhaps could be Arms. Back when we were predicting, we were thinking, well, players will have to choose between Arms and Fury. Perhaps one of them will win and the other one will end up being very scarcely played. Instead, looking at the numbers right now, they are still quite healthy in terms of numbers, in terms of play rate, right? Even their damage is actually very comparable. Not only is it high, because they are breaking the 130k barrier, which is broken by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, by 9 specs, and there are 2 of them. So not only their damage is good, but they are matching each other right now. So Arms is doing slightly better than we expected in the predictions. The last of the ones we did underrate was Red Paladin. Because when we made our prediction, we said, well, sure, Red Paladin is going to stay popular because after the rework, there are just many players who want to play Red regardless. The reason why we kept them in the B tier was because of the issue, which is still there for Red Paladin, the issue of having to choose when you talent for Mythic Plus, having to choose whether you want to go for full single target or full AoE. You have a big problem as a Red in trying to do single target damage or boss damage when you are spec'd for AoE. And vice versa, you have big problems doing AoE damage when you are spec'd for single target. So we thought this one overall was going to hurt the performance of Red Paladin in Mythic Plus. Well, maybe their performance is being hurt, but even with their hurt performance, their damage is still competitive in the end in Mythic Plus. So it still looks like they are a decent option to bring in as a DPS in Mythic Plus keys. Obviously, when you look at the absolute top keys in Mythic Plus, right, we are going through the first 100 or so keys, and we have one. Mr. Biggie Max is the only Paladin Red that shows up in the first 100 keys, right? So yes, it's not, of course, part of the super high keys at the moment, but overall it remains a quite popular pick in the high-ish level of keys for now. So we can count it as an underrated pick in our predictions. We can say that compared to our pre-release of the season predictions, we overrated Protection Warrior when it came to tanks. The other tanks were more or less correct. We also underrated Resto Druid in our predictions, with the other healers being mostly correct. And when it came to the DPS, we overrated Feral Druid and Survival. We once again believed in the meme and ended up being hurt. And then we underrated a few specs like Demo, like Red Paladin, and partially also like Arms Warrior. Most of the other specs have been performing similar to our predictions. Even the specs in the middle we haven't mentioned. The ones in the A tier or in the high part of the B tier, specs like Enhancement, specs like Assassination, like Arcane and like Fire Mage, specs like Fury Warrior, all these specs are doing more or less as it was expected of them. So this was our comparison, our theory crafting versus reality comparison of the results in Mythic Plus right now. We will also go ahead later down the line and do a comparison between the raiding reality right now and what was thought of the ideal compositions and ideal well-performing specs in the raid. But for now, this was the one when it came to the Mythic Plus situation in the first couple of weeks of this season. So with this little recap on the situation in Mythic Plus on this Sunday, I'm going to leave you to the rest of the end of your weekend. We're starting the goodbyes as usual by thanking all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, as well as everyone else who is doing it for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I have to speed up because I have to go out to get some groceries, come back, take a shower, and then start the stream for our raid night. So, goodbye.